is a WMUR Commitment 2020 special in partnership with the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, the Granite State Debates. Tonight, the candidates for the 2nd Congressional District.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the final night of our Granite State Debates. I'm WMUR Political Director Adam Sexton. Tonight, we're hearing from the candidates in New Hampshire's 2nd Congressional District, which stretches from Salem through Nashua to Keene and through the North Country to the Canadian border. We're live tonight, but everyone is keeping their distance because of the COVID-19 pandemic precautions. Our candidates are safely spaced apart in their own studio. I'll join them in a moment. The panelists will stay in this studio tonight. We're joined by WMUR anchor Charisse Leclerc and political reporter John DeStaso. Everyone can hear and see each other, so we look forward to a very robust debate. But first, let's learn a bit about the candidates. This is the second time that Republican Steve Negron has challenged incumbent Democratic Congresswoman Annie Kuster to represent New Hampshire's 2nd District. And once again, they're offering starkly different viewpoints on how to best serve the interests of Granite Staters, from health care to abortion.
It's all about a woman's choice.
I am a pro-life candidate.
From the economy to basic campaigning.
A lot of things that Congresswoman Kuster wants us to do is stay at home and not go out and not meet people.
My opponent is going campaigning door to door, and I hope he doesn't become a super spreader.
Each candidate has their own clear vision for how to help New Hampshire thrive that in many cases differs from their opponent. Now it's up to voters to decide if they want this Democrat to represent them for a 5th term or if they're ready for this Republican to bring a change of direction. WMUR News 9 evaluated all legally qualified candidates and selected those considered most newsworthy according to its objective criteria to participate in this debate. The candidates will get 1 minute to answer questions tonight, and 30-second rebuttals will be allowed at the moderator's discretion. And I will begin with the opening question tonight as we welcome the candidates in. Thank you for joining us, Congresswoman and Mr. Negron.
How you doing, Adam?
And this first question goes to you first, Congresswoman. We live in a moment when many people who express their opinions worry they're going to be the target of cruelty, hate, or mockery. Others feel that no matter how factual something is, the facts may be dismissed in favor of politics. How will you convince Granite Staters that America can come together again and that they can trust you to lead them with honesty?
Well, good evening, Adam. Great to be with you. Steve, wonderful to be with you again. And hopefully we have set the tone in our campaign. I think it is true that the country has become far too divided. I grew up in a Republican family, and so I'm uniquely situated to bring people together. And I said when I went to Congress, I'd bring a new approach, and that's what I've done. I created the first bipartisan opioid task force with my former colleague Frank Ginta from New Hampshire, and it's still going strong. I also created the first ever bipartisan task force to end sexual violence. And I'm proud of the work that I've done with my colleagues across the aisle, and I look forward to a very civil discussion tonight.
Same question to you, Mr. Negron.
Well, thank you, Adam, and Charisse and John, thank you very much, and to WMUR and CNAs for hosting us, and again, Congresswoman Kuster. You know, those words, cruelty, hatred, and mockery, have rung true even before our president was actually inducted into office and took the oath of office. It's a shame that that's something that almost is a battle cry from the folks on the left. It isn't about doing good legislation. It's about at every turn throwing rocks at an administration when they're trying to do the right thing. My opponent will talk to you throughout this next 50 minutes about how her bipartisanship has moved the ball forward, but we'll clearly show that that hasn't been it. You know, we can get back together to the right way. This is our country, the United States. You know, when I was a young officer as a second lieutenant, this country entrusted in me one of the greatest responsibilities, and that's protecting this country from a nuclear attack. This country can do the same thing again by sending me to Congress. Thank you.
All right, let's go to our panel, and our first question comes from John DeStaso.
Thank you, and good evening to both of you. This week, President Trump said Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, was a, quote, disaster, that the doctors involved are idiots, and that voters don't want to hear more from the country's scientific leaders about the pandemic. So, Mr. Negron, do you agree with that message, and do you tell Granite Staters who are craving information about the deadly pandemic, what do you tell them?
Well, thank you for that question, John. Clearly, we know that there is a group of folks that we have to protect. There's no question about that. And I believe that the science has shown that this universe of folks are more susceptible to the pandemic and the coronavirus. So clearly we need to do something more to protect them. But I think what the issue is that it isn't a peanut butter spread. You know, it isn't that everybody's affected the same way. And you're right, John. Granite Staters want to know. Granite Staters want to get out of their homes. Granite Staters want to get back to their normal lives. Kids want to go back to school. So yes, absolutely. You know, we need to look at what that science is and how it's affecting that specific universe of people. But to take a peanut butter spread like that, I think is wrong. I think there are people out there that have shown that they can actually survive this pandemic. Let's protect those that are most vulnerable. And for the rest of us, let's try to get back onto our lives to where we were prior to the pandemic happening.
And Representative Custer, there are people across New Hampshire and the country who believe the U.S. has actually overreacted to COVID and that elected officials are not telling the whole truth. How do you respond to that?
Well, first, let me go back to Dr. Fauci, because I have tremendous faith in Dr. Fauci and in the medicine. We had 13 teletown halls because my constituents were so anxious to get information last spring about COVID-19. I want to thank Dr. Chan at the state level and Dr. Calderwood, who came on those calls just to explain to people this is such a challenge. And yes, of course we want to get back to work. Of course we want to get back to school. But we have to follow the science. And that's why I laid out a roadmap to recovery. It's on our website, koster.house.gov, and you can see the steps that we need to take with increasing testing, contact tracing, and then I'm very excited this evening to get into the discussion about the vaccine that we've been working on in my committee in Congress.
Next question comes from Charisse LeClaire.
Adam, thank you. Good evening to you both. Earlier this month, House Democrats passed a $2.2 trillion bill to fund additional stimulus checks for Americans, additional unemployment benefits, state and local aid, money for education, childcare, the airline and restaurant industries, and coronavirus testing and treatment. The Senate has not voted on that bill, and right now House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is negotiating with administration officials over this. Congresswoman Custer, we'll start with you. You voted in favor of the large bill, but what is your specific top funding priority, and what would you be willing to do without?
Sure. Well, number one, it's the scientific response, the healthcare that I talked about. We need a national testing strategy, and we need to keep people safe and separate if they test positive. So using isolation and following the science. The biggest issue that we have is the vaccine, and we're working on that in our committee, and I think we will have a safe and effective vaccine. But part of the HEROES funding is about not only the research, but also equitable distribution of the vaccine. But the real issue that's keeping the two parties apart, and I feel so strongly about this, in fact, our governor agrees with me, it's funding for state and local reimbursement for the lost revenue. It would be $800 million to the state of New Hampshire. And if we don't come together and pass this bill, that is going to be a tremendous hole in our state budget come January when the legislature reconvenes.
Thank you. And Mr. Negron, if elected, you may need to offer some compromise on this issue as well. What are your top priorities, and what would you say to colleagues about compromising?
Well, I think the issue that we see right here, Charisse, is that, they want Nancy Pelosi and her government wants to have all these additional things in this corona relief bill, and that's just not the case. If you really wanted to help somebody, then just excise that out, put a PPP program in place, and let's vote on that. If you wanted to put an extension for unemployment benefits, let's excise that and let's put it in place. Look, the administration is willing to negotiate on these things because we know those are the things that are required and need help here in the great state of New Hampshire. But when you wrap everything up and it's this way or no way, I think that's wrong. And if there was, if the Congresswoman really wanted to help New Hampshire, then she should go to Speaker Pelosi and say, let's just talk about PPP right now. Let's get this done. We can have it in the bank accounts next week. But that's not the case, right? The case is that this is an overarching kind of bill, that they want to get some stuff in that's extraordinarily overspending. That's not what this administration wants. But if we really wanted to do some things, we could do some things smartly and go forward.
Congresswoman, 30 seconds.
Well, I think an $800 million hole in the New Hampshire budget is significant, and I represent my constituents in the 2nd Congressional District. I've had conversations with the governor. In fact, he's been talking to Vice President Pence and talking to Republican senators to make sure that we get that reimbursed funding, because we will have devastating cuts across the board in our state budget if we don't.
Next question comes from John DeStaso.
Thank you. Mr. Negron, a survey of behavioral health organization CEOs by the National Council for Behavioral Health says that 52% of those organizations are seeing an increase in the demand for services, but capacity is diminishing as a result of the pandemic. What should Congress do right now to address and plan ahead for the increasing demand on mental health services?
That's a great question, John. And let me just phrase it differently. It's not because of the pandemic. It's because of our reaction to the pandemic. And so, absolutely, we now know that people shut in their homes over the last 6 to 8 months is not a good response. And so it's going to show and come to fruition that mental health is going to be a challenge. And I think that if that's something that this Granite State needs, then in this stimulus bill, we should be talking about those kind of things and getting the money into the Granite State. Holding it up for other reasons is not the way, I believe, that you govern. You don't govern by sitting there and holding things hostage. So yes, I absolutely agree that because of this pandemic and our response to it, that we've had some mental health issues. Look, we're social creatures, John. We want to get out. We want to talk to people, which is why I kept on door knocking, and people were appreciative of that. But once we know that there's some issues out there, we should get back to the government, get back to our job of legislating, and get some money into the state so we can help those so that we don't have second or third order effects because of our reaction to the pandemic.
And Congresswoman, same question, please.
Well, I did see a recent study, John. Out of 100,000 people, 37% of the people had increased anxiety and mental health issues. We've seen this across the board in numerous conversations with our mental health providers and our treatment providers. I do a lot with the opioid treatment community. We've had a 30% increase in opioid overdoses and opioid deaths. So that funding was in the CARES Act back in March. Thank God that that passed in a bipartisan way, and we got that funding immediately to the state, but that's also part of the funding that's in the HEROES Act. And by the way, Speaker Pelosi and the President and Secretary Mnuchin are ready to reach a deal. Let's call it what it is. It's Mitch McConnell in the Senate that's holding this up.
Okay, next question goes to Charisse LeClaire.
Thank you. On Tuesday, the White House testing czar, Admiral Brett Giroir, was in New Hampshire and said the country will probably have widespread home testing kits available in a few months. How much money should be spent on this effort? What mechanism should the federal government use to distribute testing kits when they become available? And what part of the population should go first in getting these kits? Representative Kuster, we'll start with you.
Well, this is one of the big disappointments of the Trump administration from the very beginning with COVID. It didn't have to be this way. We now have over 200,000 deaths, well over 200,000, close to 500 deaths right here in New Hampshire. I agree that people want to get out and about with their life, but this is a highly contagious disease. So testing would make a big, big difference. If you could test before Thanksgiving so that you could hug your grandchildren and enjoy the holiday. But this administration never had a national testing strategy. I'm glad to hear that Admiral Giroir is talking about a test now. It's long past overdue. I think it should be distributed widely. I think obviously nursing homes, first responders, but I think anyone that gets out and about in their life for work or wants to be with their family should have access to that test. And the quality of our life would improve dramatically, as it will with the vaccine.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Mr. Negron, same question to you.
Well, thank you, Charisse. And absolutely, before we start spending more money, let's look at the $1 trillion that we haven't spent from the first stimulus package, right? This isn't throwing some more money out there. I mean, let's just be judicious with the money that we have. This Democratic Party, they don't find a bill that they don't want to sign on to and spend money. So I would work with the great state of New Hampshire and DHSS and the governor to figure out who are those people. There should not be a mandate. There should not be required testing for everybody. That's not who we are in the live free or die state. But it is a situation right now that if, in fact, we're able to use some of those resources that are out there to go ahead and get these testing and these kits into the hands of the folks that want them, we should absolutely do that. And, I want to go back to Congresswoman Kuster's plan. The plan never showed any hope, any idea of getting through this. It's about stay at home, wear a mask, don't do anything. And because of that plan is the situation that we find ourselves in, that we have this mental health issue, and now we have this increase in cases because people have decided to stay home and not go out.
Congresswoman Kuster, you were invoked. 30 seconds.
I just want to take exception. The plan was followed closely in New Hampshire, and that's why our results are so much better than results in other states all across the country. We now have, I think, over 40 states with dramatically increasing numbers of positive COVID-19 and increasing hospitalization. Of course, I want people to be able to get out and about. And the very good news here is our unemployment is now down to just 6.5% from a high of 16% during the shutdown. So people are getting out and about. I just want them to be safe as they do it and keep their families safe as well.
Quick follow-up here, Mr. Negron. Do you believe that the government should make these testing kits individually available for free or subsidize them in some way?
Well, I believe with the money they already have that's been passed by Congress, $1 trillion can buy a lot of kits. So I think we can get some kits and offer them to people who do want them.
And Congresswoman Custer, I know you're taking a sip of water there, so I'll stretch out a little bit. But what do you think? Should the government pick up the entire tab to make these testing kits available to the public?
I don't think they'll need to pay for the whole thing. I disagree here with Mr. Negron. I think if you can get the price point down to a place that's reasonable, I'm pretty sure Bill Gates can pay for his own testing kits. So I don't think the taxpayers need to pay for everyone else's testing kit.
Okay, next question from John DeStaso.
Thank you. Mr. Negron, in the last WMUR debate with your primary opponent, you stated you may not take a COVID-19 vaccine even if approved and marketed to the public. The president has long spoken of the vaccine as a turning point in the battle against COVID. Do you agree? And if not, how does the U.S. get out of this pandemic if not through vaccinations?
Well, my sister actually contracted COVID-19, John, and she went through the protocols without the vaccination, and she's perfectly fine now. This vaccination is just like any vaccination. It's my own personal decision. It should be something that's mandated to me by the government. We have flu vaccines that are out there that are not mandated by the government. These are something that I take as a personal liberty. I don't need big government coming in to tell me that I have to take a vaccination for something that we really don't know what the end result's going to be. So, if the president wants to take a vaccination, that's up to his choice and anybody else's. But mandating mandatory vaccine, John, for a COVID-19 pandemic, I think is a wrong course of action. If people want to take it for their own well-being and state of mind, they should do that. But to mandate it, I disagree with.
And Congresswoman, you brought forward the Coronavirus Vaccine Development Act to ensure that the nation could mass produce a vaccine once approved. But an August Gallup poll showed 1 in 3 Americans would not take such a vaccine. In the vice presidential debate, Democratic nominee Kamala Harris said, quote, "If Dr. Fauci, the doctors, tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. But if Donald Trump tells us we should take it, I'm not going to take it," close quote. Why should people trust the vaccine, any vaccine, being tested at this unprecedented pace?
Well, here's the point. I think it's President Trump that politicized the vaccine. In fact, because he talked about rushing the vaccine before the election, there's been a 29% drop in the number of Americans willing to take the vaccine. What I have faith in is the scientific process, and we need to go back to that. We need to go back to the Food and Drug Administration, get past this election, and under a Biden administration, when we are listening to science and following the science, then we will we'll know if it's safe and effective. We have 9 different candidates in human trials right now, and until we know whether it's safe and effective, this discussion is essentially moot. But I am confident that we will have a vaccine, and I think any elected official, once it is proved, needs to step up and have confidence in that system so that we can restore the integrity. We will not find our way out of the COVID-19 pandemic without the vaccine. And so this is critical for our economy, for the well-being of our families, and critical for you and your family too.
Next question from Charisse LeClaire.
Adam, thank you. The pandemic is negatively impacting people throughout society, and there are now growing concerns that women will bear long-term effects. A Bureau of Labor Statistics study outlines 2 reasons for this. First, the crisis is hitting sectors where women's employment is more concentrated, like restaurants, retail, hospitality, and healthcare. Second, because schools and daycares have closed, childcare is now more challenging, and that is an additional obstacle for working mothers. The authors estimate 15 million single mothers in the U.S. will be the most severely affected here. What congressional action can be taken now to help women, and what should be done in the next Congress to address the longer-term implications of this? Representative Custer, we'll start with you.
Charisse, thank you for that question. And I want to say to every mom that's out there coping with COVID right now, I hear you, I see you, and I want to support you. We can help right now with childcare, giving support to childcare organizations legislation so they reopen their doors safely and so that your children will be safe and you can go back to work, as well as giving the supports to our school system, to our teachers, so that they can make sure that children are safe, whether they're in school in person or whether they're learning from home. 1 in 4 women has been forced out of the workforce, either reduced her hours or left her job completely. This will have monumental impact on our economy, and I feel very strongly that we need to tackle this and tackle it now. Thank you for the question. I absolutely support the legislation, and again, this funding is in the HEROES Act, and that's why I feel so strongly about getting it passed.
Congresswoman, thank you. Mr. Negron, same question.
Absolutely, Sharice. And I just want to expand it because there are single fathers out there that are facing the same kind of issue with raising their children. Look, I had a young lady from Nashville. Her name was Alyssa. And she actually called the Congresswoman's office to try to get some help, to try to get some backing so that we can open up the schools. To the point exactly is that there are children out there that need to be back in school. Kids need to be back in an institution of learning, but we're not. We're in a lockdown, and in my town of Nashville, you know, they're not allowing the kids back to school, and I think that's a disservice to the kids. And you know what? Let kids go back to school. I have a friend of mine who's a daycare supervisor. You know, let's find ways to get daycares open so that parents, single parents and married couples, can use those facilities to get the school back. But you know what? Again, this is our reaction to the pandemic. There are parents with kids out there that want to get back to school. We're not allowing them, and I think that's a disservice, and we'll see that for future generations to come.
Next question from John DeStaso.
Mr. Negron, with states across the country seeing a spike in COVID cases, the next administration will have to consider another far-reaching shutdown of different sectors of society. This could affect the rural area of the 2nd District, where COVID-19 has not been widespread. How would you advocate for your constituents in areas where more dramatic shutdowns may not be necessary?
Well, absolutely. You know, and that's the unique thing about the 2nd Congressional District. We have such a diverse populace up and down the district. And, you know, we look at some of the northern counties in COAS that they have not been hit as hard as others. So my reaction to what they should be doing in COAS shouldn't be the same reaction that's doing in Hillsborough. But they need to know that we know that there's a population. I don't think this is going to change, John, with an increase of COVID positives. You know, we know that there's a universe of folks, the elderly, that we need to take care of. I don't think any more outbreak is going to show that there's another universe out there that's just as susceptible. So we would work with the 2nd Congressional, make sure that we're going to get the resources that they need. But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You know, we need to make sure that we take a proactive approach to making sure that we understand what's happening, and not that, you know, that what I did down in the southern part of the state is the same thing I'm going to do in the western part or even the northern. So if in fact that does happen, we got to look at it in its totality and make the right decisions for that specific region.
Thank you. And Congresswoman Custer, same question, please.
What's interesting, John, is when I spend time up in Coos County, as I do, I was up there this summer for several days, they had very few cases, but everyone was wearing a mask. All the meetings were outdoors, physically distant. And when I asked people, they said, we want to have very few cases. We do not want COVID to come in. We're being very, very careful. And so those are the types of decisions that I think people all across the Granite State are making. They're making their own decisions. They're following the science, not magical thinking. And they're looking forward to a time where we will have the vaccine, where you will be able to take the vaccine and keep your family safe, and we'll be able to completely open up the economy. The other thing about the western and northern part of the state is making sure that we have access to affordable broadband, which is an issue that I've been working on in Congress, and the COVID-19 epidemic has really pulled back the curtain on that. Every family needs access to affordable broadband.
Adam,
Okay.
if I may, you know, that's a great point, Congresswoman. You know, you've been in Congress for 8 years. And broadband has been an issue. You know, you can go out there and can't even dial a 911 number. So, you know, we shouldn't have had, you know, there was some COVID emergency funds that gave 8 states or 8 towns broadband. We now know that distance learning is an issue. We should have had this fixed a long time ago. And when I go to the North Country, they want people to say, you know, we've asked and we've asked and we've asked. We've been left alone up here. And so I'm glad you brought up that point that we don't have broadband in the North.
The good news is in Coos County, we did get funding for not just extending broadband, but also for telephone, making sure that mobile, we had towers throughout Coos County. And I think this is the type of result that you get when we work worked together, working with the governor, the funding that came through the CARES Act most recently that went to those 8 towns so that we could extend broadband to the door, making sure people with telehealth, telework, and obviously education from home have access.
But it shouldn't have taken a pandemic to bring that to fruition.
Let's move to a student question now. We're going to hear from Dominique Bolduc, a student at St. Anselm College.
My question is, what do you think is the greatest challenge that we're facing in our state right now? And do you have any policies or thoughts on how to fix it?
And we've addressed the pandemic at this point, so let's look to the future beyond COVID-19, and we start with you, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Adam. I was going to suggest just that. I talked about how the pandemic has really pulled back the curtain on a lot of social challenges that we have. We've been struggling with the opioid epidemic, and as I said, I created the bipartisan task force with Representative Ginta. We brought $425 million to New Hampshire through the Cures Act, increasing access to treatment, long-term recovery, and of course, working with law enforcement. Regretfully, because of the pandemic, we've actually seen an increase. EMTs and treatment providers and hospitals have told me up to a 30% increase in opioid overdoses and a 30% increase in opioid deaths, not just here, but all across the country. So that's going to be one of the very first priorities as we build back better, making sure that we're looking out for those who have fallen through the cracks because of the pandemic.
Mr. Negron, the greatest challenge facing New Hampshire after we get out of the pandemic?
I think the greatest challenge is making sure we have a place for our younger generation to stay in the state. I think it's about giving a young generation an opportunity not to leave the great state of New Hampshire, but to come here and stay. And there's so many things out there that we have failed them, and our representation has failed them. You know, it is about the opioid pandemic. You know, this has not gotten better over the 8 years, regardless of whatever task force would put together. You know, our energy costs are still exorbitantly high, and I like to work with the governor and the legislature to figure out a way that we can do that. There's lots of ways that we can make New Hampshire better to bring people in. Look, we want to keep our state. We have to attract young folks, and I think that's one of the biggest things that everybody just ignores. And I think we can do some great things with the governor's office and his administration. You were
invoked there, Congresswoman?
Yeah, I just wanted to say this is an unusual silver lining from the pandemic, and I do want to think about the sort of wins and losses here. And we talked briefly about telehealth. That's been a big positive. Telework, obviously, in New Hampshire, it was extraordinary. People were working from home within 24, 48 hours, big employers like Fidelity and BAE. But one of the issues that we have here is that people are actually moving up here because of the pandemic. And I think that's a good thing for our state, and I think we're going to see some growth and economic activity coming out of these new visitors that are deciding to stay because it's so safe here.
Next question from Charisse Leclerc.
With the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, there has been renewed discussion about the possibility of overturning Roe v. Wade. Mr. Negron, you are staunchly pro-life. If Roe v. Wade is overturned and you are a member of Congress, what bill would you author or immediately sign on to restrict access to abortion?
Well, Charisse, you know, I think that when everybody talks about a nominee to the Supreme Court, we shouldn't look at it in the confines of a single decision that a previous Supreme Court made. We need to look at this in the situation of, is somebody being nominated to the Supreme Court that interprets the Constitution the way it was intended and the way our founding fathers had put it together. I know the left side and Congresswoman Custer wants to talk about Roe v. Wade and wants to talk about the ACA, you know, because that's how they look at the Supreme Court. They look at the Supreme Court as a bench to legislate. That's not what the Supreme Court is about. The Supreme Court is about interpretation of the Constitution as it applies to the country. And so, you know, whether or not the ACA is overthrown, whether or not Roe v. Wade is overthrown is really not the issue. The issue is Judge Barrett the right person to be nominated to the Supreme Court? Clearly she is. Clearly she has impeccable standards, unbelievable background, and I think we're going to have her the next Supreme Court on Monday when the whole Senate takes a vote.
But Mr. Negron, would there be legislation that you would support or want to sign on to that would restrict access to abortion?
Well, you know, it's very clear, Charisse. You know, it's not a secret to anybody watching that I'm a pro-life candidate. But the thing that's important is that, you know, those people that will make that decision, and there will be some, and I wish they wouldn't, I'm still going to be there for them on the backside of it. You know, it's not going to be a situation where they go through a facility and they terminate their pregnancy and then they're forgotten. You know, because of my faith, I'm going to be there for everybody, regardless of their decision, and that's how I look at the legislation.
Congresswoman Custer, you are staunchly pro-choice. If Roe v. Wade is upheld and Congress feels empowered to codify abortion rights, how far would you be willing to go in allowing late-term elective abortions?
Well, let me just say, and thank you, Charisse, for the question. Don't take my word for it. It's Donald Trump who chose Amy Coney Barrett because she will overturn the Affordable Care Act, will lose coverage for pre-existing conditions, and overturn Roe v. Wade. And my opponent's position is really very extreme. He does not believe in any termination of pregnancy, even in the life of the mother, or rape or incest. I was an adoption attorney for 25 years, so I feel I've walked the walk on this issue, and I feel very strongly. I think Roe v. Wade balanced the equities, and I believe that that is should be the law of the land. It is, and if it's overturned, we will codify it in a Democratic Congress.
You were invoked, Mr. Negron.
Yes, thank you. You know, talk about extreme. You support a bill that actually would take a life after it's actually been birthed by a mother. That's extreme. And and I've heard you say,
Mr. Negron, that's not even possible.
I've
I've
heard you often
that's
say
murder.
that you're an adoption attorney, and I think that your stance on life is kind of bad for business. What I believe in is that there's a situation out there that these women, some of them will make that harsh decision, absolutely, but we need to be there for them regardless of it. And so that's the situation we go to.
Mr. Negron, I think that's where we differ. I've represented over 300 birth mothers. They were facing a difficult decision. They chose to carry the pregnancy, place the child for adoption. Not once did one of those birth mothers want the government to make that decision, and that's where you and I are different.
I applaud you for those 300 babies that were born.
Let's move on to our next question from John DeStaso.
Thank you. Recently, the New York Times did a lengthy series of articles on President Trump's tax returns, finding that in both 2016 and 2017, he paid just $750 in federal tax. These articles renewed debate about how much wealthier Americans should pay in income tax. Some people have complained that this shows that wealthy Americans, including powerful companies like Amazon, can use the current system to get out of paying their fair share. So, Congresswoman Custer, what do you think about that criticism, and what proposal, if any, would you support to level the playing field?
Well, first of all, let me say I think it's been unconscionable that from the beginning President Trump has not shared his tax returns with the American people, as every other candidate for president historically has. Now we know why. He only paid $750, less than almost every taxpayer here in the state of New Hampshire, and there were years when he paid zero in taxes. I absolutely believe that a person with that kind of wealth should be paying taxes, and I think we need the IRS to have the oversight and strengthen their implementation of our tax code. He is cheating you as the taxpayer, and I think it's unconscionable, and he should be voted out on November 3rd.
And Mr. Negron, same question, please.
Absolutely, John. You know, clearly the tax code, as written, over 75,000 pages plus addendums, needs to be looked at. The tax code as it exists has given rise to an industry where you have to go to people to tell you what their taxes are. But the interesting thing is, John, is that, when you look at the Constitution and you look at what the requirements are to run for president, and I've looked a couple of times, and I got to tell you, I haven't seen anything in there about tax returns. So, when they want to make this battle cry about tax returns, and it's a voluntary thing, many presidents have done that before, but it's not a requirement to become president of the United States. And they have been after this thing since prior to his election in 2018, or 2016, excuse me. So, it isn't about tax returns. It's about another divisive opportunity to go after this president to make sure that he's doing something illegal, because it isn't about legislating. It's about this visceral reaction to this president. It's been there since 2017, and quite frankly, the state of New Hampshire is tired of it. Everything is about fighting instead of just getting together and putting good legislation on the table.
Okay, we're going to take a little debate palate cleanser here in the form of a lightning round. We're going to start with you, Mr. Negron.
Yes.
Are you in favor, I should say 15-second answers here, a little quicker. Are you in favor of eliminating the Electoral College?
Absolutely not.
Congresswoman Custer?
No.
Next question.
That's funny, but she supported Buttigieg, who wanted to get rid of it.
My position is no.
Congresswoman Custer, 2 weeks ago, the state approved a 1.24 million cubic yard expansion of the North Country Environmental Services landfill in Bethlehem over the health and environmental concerns of some residents. Do you agree with the state's decision?
No.
Mr. Negron?
No.
Mr. Negron, how many people will you be inviting to your Thanksgiving dinner?
As many as I can.
And Congresswoman Custer?
2, my son and his girlfriend.
And Congresswoman Custer, New Hampshire is one of just two
Oh, I
states.
should say 3. I'm sorry, her sister's coming.
Okay, well, we were going to hold you to that, I think, right? New Hampshire is just one of 2 states that has not started to label interstate exits based on mileage. Do you agree with the federal mandate to require states to follow those guidelines for marking exits?
I think it's helpful because then I think you know how far you are to the next exit. And I think as a public safety issue, it will be very helpful. People, just running out of gas, or if you pull over with a problem with your car or in the snow. So I would imagine, and for state troopers, I think it'd be very helpful to be able to identify where you are based on mileage.
Mr. Negron?
No, and I think it's just silly, right? We've got kinds of apps on our phones that tell you exactly where you're at, where the gas stations are at.
If you
know
can
what?
afford a phone.
It's one of the situations that you go to Jersey, the real question is, what exit off the turnpike are you? I mean, it's Americana. We shouldn't be changing it.
All right, we can bring John in on that one, but maybe he'll want to weigh in on this one too, Steve. Name your favorite moment in the history of the Red Sox-Yankees rivalry.
Oh, I got to tell you, it's the A-Rod trying to knock the ball out of the first baseman's mitt. That was pretty pivotal.
Congresswoman Custer?
I think just the big win. That made a big difference in our life, and I'm just proud of the Red Sox all the way.
All right, we're going to get back to the serious questions now with John DeStaso.
I'll refrain from weighing in on that. What is Congress's role in regulating big tech companies like Apple, Facebook, and Google to protect consumer privacy and at the same time protect the free flow of information? Mr. Negron.
That's a great question, John. And when you look at it, you have to look at it in the context of like an antitrust, but not an antitrust when something becomes a monopoly. An antitrust when people are actually shutting down your First Amendment right of free speech. And we're seeing it right now on some of these platforms. And that's not the role of the CEO of these high-tech companies. They shouldn't be picking winners and losers. That's not what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be a platform for free flow of information. And we've seen it now to the detriment of all sides and all parties that's out there, that they are just hiding information. And quite frankly, I don't know where they believe that they have that right to do that. So absolutely, I think the government should make sure that the freedom of speech, your First Amendment right, is still maintained regardless of the platform. And I think they should look at some of these big monolithic entities that are actually shutting down the freedom of speech that we all should enjoy.
Thank you. And Congresswoman Custer, same question.
I think our House Democratic Judiciary Committee, and I would look to my colleague David Cicilline from Rhode Island, who's chairing this subcommittee, is scheduling hearings with the big tech companies on the antitrust implications of their monopolies. And I think we do need to investigate, and if we follow those investigations with legislation, I will definitely look at it very carefully. I think we have put far too much clout, if you will, in just a handful of companies. And what we're seeing is a huge disparity between what the consumer can do and what the companies can do. And I think back in our history, we've broken up monopolies before, and we need to look at this very seriously.
Next question from Charisse Leclerc.
Earlier this week, court-appointed lawyers said they have been unable to find the parents of 545 children who were separated at the U.S. border with Mexico early in the Trump administration under a zero-tolerance policy to criminally prosecute every adult who entered the country illegally from Mexico. Mr. Negron, do you support an explicit prohibition on family separation at the border? And what is your broader plan to make sure that U.S. policies on immigration do not end up hurting families?
Great question, Charisse. And as you do know, my grandfather came here from Mexico. And so anytime that you separate a legitimate family from their kids, that's wrong. But we now know with lots of empirical data that a lot of these smugglers and a lot of these people that are bringing kids in across the country, they're not their children. They're using them as an opportunity to use them as pawns to get into this country. Part of that story too is that some of those parents, they have connected and they don't want to be reconnected with their children because they probably weren't their children to begin with. So I believe that we have to look at a holistic look at what's happening with immigration. I'm a parent of 3 beautiful children. Nobody should be split from their parents at all under any circumstance. But it's important to note, that this is a policy that was just enforced by this current administration. It was a policy that was actually put in place in the previous administration. So, those situations, if there's a way that we can make sure that we control the borders, protect this country, and allow people to come in the right way, then we should do that. Absolutely.
Representative Custer, yesterday the Justice Department said federal prosecutors have charged 127 suspected members of the violent MS-13 street gang this year. 6 face life sentences after being convicted. Reports say that although many gang members were born in the U.S., MS-13 recruits young teenagers from El Salvador and Honduras. What policies can Congress implement to reduce the flow of gang members into the U.S. and take more expedient action to disrupt leaders of MS-13 based in Central America from coordinating criminal activities here in the U.S.?
Well, I think the prosecution proves that our laws are sufficient for prosecuting these individuals, and I support that. Let me go back to the 545 children that were separated, because I think this is pure evil. And I didn't hear Mr. DeGron say that he objects to this. I think this is not Christian. It's not American. I went to the border twice. I met with these women. I know that they were their children. The group of women that I met with, there were nursing mothers whose babies had been snatched from them by ICE when they went into detention. This is not the American way. I think we should have a pathway to citizenship. I think we should have compassionate laws, and we should make sure that we track down the parents of every single one of these 545 children. It's a human rights violation right here in the United States.
Mr. Negron, you invoked 30 seconds.
Absolutely. You know, and I think, Congresswoman, you should go to Manchester and talk to some of the immigrants that are there, or go to Nashville and talk to them there. To go down to the border under the heat, you know, for a photo op, I think is the wrong thing to do. And we now know that that situation, human trafficking, is such a huge deal, but we put our heads in the sand and we don't want to acknowledge it. These people will use children to come across the border. And like I said, if it's a legitimate family, which was my very first statement, then we shouldn't do that. But we now know, and I actually talked to Mr. Tom Homan on Friday, that that situation has decreased because of the wall and because of the immigration status that we're now giving our ICE enforcement agencies the right to do the right thing.
Brief response.
I absolutely have spoken with immigrants and refugees in Nashua and across my district, and I know that they want a pathway to citizenship. They want to become American citizens. They're working very, very hard here, and I'm simply stating my moral view of the world, that this is unconscionable. What the Trump administration and Stephen Miller, he used this policy to threaten families, and I think it's wrong, and that's why President Trump should be defeated on November 3rd.
Next question from Charisse Leclerc.
Adam, thank you. Congresswoman Custer, recently the New Hampshire Police Association endorsed Mr. Negron, saying in part it was based on Negron's opposition to ending qualified immunity for law enforcement, which protects them from personal lawsuits while on duty. The union's president, Mark Morrison, said you have, quote, demonstrated a willingness to completely disregard the reality that without this protection, there will be no law enforcement officers willing to sign up to protect our communities, end quote. Congresswoman, how do you respond to that?
Well, it's not about the immunity, it's about accountability, and New Hampshire can lead the way. Our governor put together a commission. I've talked numerous times with members of the commission, including recently with Commissioner Quinn, about the experience that they had. 26 different meetings, 48 different recommendations, all of them agreed to by everyone and adopted by the governor. And it has to do with identifying implicit bias. It's about training, and it's about recognizing we need training in ethics and training in de-escalation. Millions of Americans, including people right here in New Hampshire, watched the murder of George Floyd, and I believe we can do better. And I think police right here in New Hampshire do better every single day. I appreciate Chief Kerrigan down in Nashua, who put together a group with people like Senator Melanie LeVake and Linda Gathright to talk in the community about racial inequality and about implicit bias, and to train his police to do better in community policing so that everyone can have confidence in our police.
Thank you, Mr. Negron. In communities nationwide, there are many who feel it is almost impossible to hold police accountable. If you have taken this stance on qualified immunity, how do you expect anything to change?
Well, let me just go back to the 26 meetings and the 48 recommendations that Congresswoman Custer is talking about. You know what was absent in those recommendations? Qualified immunity. Why? Because that's the very essence of law enforcement. And so Congresswoman Custer is just out of touch. I talked to Chief Ox, former police chief of Hollis, and he says, you know, by removing qualified immunity, you are actually just eviscerating the law enforcement, because that's the one thing that they know that in that life or death situation is what's protecting them. Look, we don't want what's going to happen in Seattle. We don't want what's going to happen in Portland, Kenosha, Wisconsin, or Chicago. Right? Not once has Congresswoman Custer, not once, denounced that kind of activity that's out there in the other parts of this country. You need qualified immunity because you need law enforcement in this state. And that's why I received the New Hampshire Police Association's endorsement, because you've abandoned them. And they realize that. And that's not who we are. And for once, we need to stand up and say that is not going to happen in the great state of New Hampshire. It's going to knock on our door, and we need the police to protect us. And by your stance on qualified immunity, it's clear that you've abandoned law enforcement, and that's why they're endorsing me.
Congresswoman?
No, I just wondered if he was going to answer the question she asked, so I'm good.
All right. Next question comes from John DeStaso.
Thank you. Congresswoman Custer, in the Democratic presidential primary, your friend and former House committee seatmate, Beto O'Rourke, made a very dramatic call for gun control legislation, saying, quote, "Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15," close quote. His call for confiscation drew cheers at last year's state Democratic Party convention. If Democrats take back the White House and Senate, how would you vote on a bill to outlaw and buy back the AR-15 and other so-called assault rifles?
Well, John, you know that New Hampshire has a very strong tradition of gun ownership, and I certainly respect that. Responsible gun ownership. We have a tradition of hunting, we have a tradition of being outdoors, and people want to protect their families, and I feel strongly about that. The direction that I've gone in is responsible gun reform that is related to background checks. It has very high approval by responsible gun owners and non-owners alike, and that's the direction that I think would be most important. We haven't had the bill that you suggest, so we need to take a look at that. But at this point, I'm very comfortable with the positions that I've taken on just making sure that we have reform, close the Charlestown loophole, the types of things that have led to these mass shootings that have been so tragic in elementary schools, kindergarten students, all the way up through to churches.
Thank you. And Mr. Negron, you've called for laws that empower gun owners. So what is your solution to keeping guns out of the hands of the severely mentally ill or dangerous people?
Absolutely, John. You know, and I've said this once, and I'll say it again. This issue, when we have these horrific accidents, it's not the instrument that's the issue. The issue is the mental health of those folks. And we talked about it earlier. This pandemic that the Democrats want to keep us in our homes is going to exacerbate that problem. There are going to be people out there that are mentally unstable, and they need the help, and we need to provide that help for them. But it's not the gun, John. It's not the gun. As a matter of fact, there's a bill in front of Congresswoman's committee right now, 5717, that hasn't even hit the streets, that they're going to put a 30% tax on all guns sold here in New Hampshire and a 50% tax on all ammo sold in New Hampshire. But that's not the thing that's so onerous. They want to start a national registry so that you have to register your firearm so that the government knows exactly who owns weapons. And let me tell you this, they tried this after Sandy Hook. And they tried that in New York. And the New York paper posted where every gun owner lived on a map, and they had to be forced to take it down. So no, she needs to know, Congresswoman needs to know that this is New Hampshire. We're responsible gun owners. We don't need any more legislation.
Congresswoman, 30 seconds to respond.
I just know that the polling is that the citizens of New Hampshire agree with me on responsible gun reforms such as background checks and closing the Charlestown loophole. I've not yet met a responsible gun owner who wants to contribute to this level of violence in our society.
And we do have background checks. I don't know where they say there's no background checks. You have to have a background check before you buy a firearm. So I really like somebody to tell me what background check they're talking about.
Next question from John DeStaso.
Thank you. For Mr. Negron first, just 2 hours ago, U.S. officials said that Russian hackers targeted state and local governments ahead of the election, stealing data from 2 servers. Earlier this week, the U.S. charged 6 Russian military officers for their alleged involvement in hacking aimed at American businesses, French elections, and the Winter Olympics. It appears that Russia continues a campaign of using the cyber world to disrupt and infiltrate the U.S. and its interests. When and how should the U.S. fight back using its cyber capabilities?
Well, absolutely, John. As you know, about 4 years ago, the military set up a U.S. Cyber Command for that purpose specifically. And so, this is now the new battlefield. The traditional symmetric warfare, you line up on either side of a line and you go after each other, is now morphing into this thing now where we have this cyber warfare. And there are smart people out there. We need to be able to bring some of those young kids that we have up in our schools to help try to defeat those things. Look, those guys know that when they have anything connected to the internet, and I've always said this, that just because you have technology doesn't mean we're any better off. And this is an example of that. I love our great state of New Hampshire that I circle in a bubble and I put it through an optical reader that's not connected to anything, and that's how I cast my ballot. So absolutely, I think the government needs to put some more emphasis on how we do both defensive and offensive cyber warfare, and to make sure that all those countries that we know through intelligence gathering means that they're starting to do some things, and we should go and make sure that we prevent them and then prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law.
Thank you. And Congresswoman, same question.
Well, what's interesting about that answer is that Republicans have repeatedly voted against the funding that would need to harden our defenses on our election system. I have voted for both the SHIELD Act and the SAFE Act and H.R. 1. The SAFE Act will give funding to our local municipalities to protect our voting records, your voting records. That's what we're referring to here, that voter registration records were hacked by foreign governments. And the SHIELD Act would prohibit campaigns from reaching out or from cooperating in any way with that type of foreign interference, and that they would be required to notify the FBI about any kind of interference. And I think what we're seeing here is a repeat from 2016 with the interference from the Trump administration. I think what people in New Hampshire need to know is you can vote safely and you can vote now at your town clerk, and that's probably the best thing to do at this point.
Next question, Charisse Leclerc.
Changes to the climate, whether caused by humans or otherwise, have presented challenges for New Hampshire's ski industry and other winter sports venues, all of which are part of the state's important tourism and hospitality industry. Congresswoman, what is the best way right now to reverse environmental trends that may eventually take away the conditions that this industry needs to survive?
Well, thank you so much, Charisse, for the question. And I grew up in the ski industry. My father was the founder of Wildcat Mountain Ski Area, and I'm a ski racer and raised two ski racers. So this is personal to me. I've put out my clean energy agenda to tackle climate change. And again, you can find it at custer.house.gov. We need renewable energy. We need to lower the rate of CO2 in the environment. Again, follow the science. And the good news is we can create good, clean energy jobs, so it's a win-win-win. This is going to be a top priority in the Biden administration, and I'm very excited to be a part of it. I serve on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, on the Energy Subcommittee, and last week, 2 weeks ago, the U.S. House passed a comprehensive clean energy bill that will be the backbone for legislation in January.
Mr. Negron, same question to you.
Yes, well, clearly, Charisse, having been a Scoutmaster for over 15 years and taking my troop through this great state of New Hampshire, we've hiked every mountain, crossed every stream. We want to do everything to protect the natural beauty of this state. And I would look at those things that are smart and prudent and judicious to make sure that we don't do something that's going to affect this this great state of ours. Look, the situation is this, that we're not the bad actor. We want to look at situation. If we're really so concerned about the world climate change, then we need to look at those bad actors that we're not doing anything about. The Democrats just want to point to us and have this Green New Deal when they really should be looking at places like India and China that have the largest carbon footprint. We reduced our own carbon footprint organically without having anybody telling us what to do. And so I think we can do some smart things. Look, I grew up on an island in Puerto Rico. I don't share the same snow affinity that Congresswoman Custer has, but I do like traipsing in the snow. And so we need to do everything we can to make sure that the state that I love is going to be there for my kids and their kids as well.
We're going to move to a final question now, 30 seconds to answer. And first to you, Mr. Negron. If you had to go into a high school civics class and assure the students that politicians can work together and that they should have faith in the American system, what would you say to them?
I absolutely would say, man, I'd say look at the 1980s and look at President Reagan and Tip O'Neill. They couldn't have been further apart on the political spectrum, but they sat together shoulder to shoulder to get good legislation done. What we see now is just a bunch of rhetoric. It isn't about legislation. It's about bringing down an administration. And I can tell them with new blood in Congress, we can actually turn this around. And I believe that's the future. Let them know that you can work together. That's what we're based on. We're not based about this we versus they. That's what we have with the Democrats, and I think we can do better.
Congresswoman Custer?
I would explain to them it's one America. We're terribly divided now, but after this election, I look forward to bringing everyone together in January. I would tell them about the work that I've done, working across the aisle with the Veterans Committee, with the Agriculture Committee, and now in my Energy and Commerce Committee. I would tell them about the progress that we made on opioids and on ending sexual violence. These are tough challenges, but I really enjoy working with my colleagues, and I would explain to them they would enjoy it as well.
All right, we've reached the point of final statements, and the first one will be delivered by Congresswoman Custer.
I want to thank you for sticking with us tonight. This has been a lot of information. This is a very important election, certainly the most important in my lifetime. I can tell you all about the things I've done for New Hampshire, the federal funds that I've brought from towns across the district, Bristol, Claremont, Keene, Swansea, Hudson, Franklin, the list goes on and on. I can tell you about the legislation that I've passed, and I can tell you about the work that we've done for constituents every single day, and I want to thank my team for that. But most importantly, I want to tell you about my values. I want to bring people together to work hard, to take care of you and your family. I care about your life. I care about the challenges you face. I know you want to hug your grandchildren and hug your grandparents. We all want this to end. And I am working hard to make sure that we follow the science, that we have a vaccine that you can rely on, you can feel safe about, and we can all get back to our lives before COVID and build back better.
Mr. Negron, a minute for a closing statement.
Thank you, Adam, and Congresswoman Custer. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
This isn't an election about policy. This isn't an election about big government versus small government. This is an election about who we are as a country. And it is clear to you and to me what we've seen across this country for the last year. We see this pandemonium in the streets of Seattle and Portland and Kenosha. And it's there because of the inability of the Democrat Party to work with this current administration. You've heard that Congresswoman has worked across the aisle. You know, she's part of the group that's actually been there, wanted to impeach this president even before the inauguration. We need to get back, but there's a time for a change. It's about building our future. We need a new start. We need a new vision. And I ask for your vote on November 3rd, and I ask for your prayers. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you to the candidates. I think after this week, you qualify as the partisan equivalent of best friends. We appreciate you on this platform with us here tonight. Thank you to the esteemed panel, and thank you to all of us who are watching at home and all of you who are watching at home for this week's Granite State Debates. If you missed any part of this series, you can catch it online on all of our digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.